Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, sir, and everyone. Today we are from Group 9, and let me introduce the group first. And my name is Dipa Rajasa, and my partner is Putri Ningsih and Ahmad Agusman. So the topic today is teaching the language, the what module 4 and 5, teaching pronunciation and vocabulary. Next, please. Okay, but before we going for now, so I would like to tell the introduction first. In the classroom, it's simply more efficient to select and grade the language to be learned so that learners waste a minimum of time on frustrating incomprehension and have plenty of opportunities to practice what they know and use it as a jump off point for the learning of new language. But such selection and grading demands first some kind of segmenting of language into bits to be organized to a systematic syllabus. Conventionally, linguistics have broken language down into three main components: the phonology or sound system of the language, the lexis or the word or phrases which express concept, the structure or the way words or bits of words are struck together to make acceptable sentence or phrases. Language teachers define this more conveniently as pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. A language course may be based on pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar, or on the more communicative categories of topics, situation, notion, and function. Next slide, please. So we're going to the Module 4, Teaching Pronunciation. Unit 1. What does teaching pronunciation involve? The concept of pronunciation may be said to include, first, the sound of the language or phonology, second, stress and rhythm, and third, intonation. Okay, so the first is sound the language, phonology. It is useful to be able to list and define the sounds or phonemes of the language by writing them down using phonetics representations. So the task transcribing sound. Take a dictionary that includes phonetic transcriptions and check through its phonetics alphabet, some of whose symbol may be different from those suggested in box 4.1. Look at few words and their corresponding phonetics representations. Make sure you can follow and understand the transcription. Now choose 10 words at random out of a book and try transcribing them into phonetic script. If you have used your dictionary's phonetic alphabet, look up the word in the dictionary to check. If you have used the alphabet suggested above, then compare your version with that of colleges. So this is the box for one, the phonetic alphabets, like symbol A, for example, arm, heart, and the side is consonant, the symbol B, for example, bed, about, and D, for example, do and side. So move on to the rhythm and stress, or stress or rhythm. English speech rhythm is characterized by one-tone units, a word of group of words which carries one central stressed syllabus. Other syllables, if there any, are latent. So the task is recognizing rhythm and stress. In pace, one participant dictates a short sentence, both participants write it down, capitalizing the stress syllabus. Then again, with the others participant dictating, and again, 2 or 3 times compare the result. And the third point is intonation. Next slide, please. All right, the intonation. Intonation, the rise and falls in tone that make the tune of an utterance is an important aspect of the pronunciation of English, often making a difference to meaning or implication. So the task, recognizing intonation. Listen to a brief recording. One listing not more than a minute or so of a speaker of the language you teach from a listening comprehension cassette, for example. Write down a sentence from recording using conventional spelling and put it indications of rising and falling intonation and stress. If you are working in a group, compare the result with each other. So that's the unit 1. So we move on to the unit 2, listening to the accent. The purposes of this exercise is to find out the specific pronunciation problems of learners by actually listening to examples and having to analyze and define them, and to think about how these problems might be explained to the learners and corrected. Okay, unit 2, there are inquiry, identifying elements of foreign pronunciation. In identifying, there are 4 stages. And the first stage is preparing materials. Using audio cassettes, prepare recordings, 2 or 3 minutes in length of foreign accent. The recordings should consist of short interview with speakers who are not very proficient in the target language. The next stage is analysis. Listen to the recordings and try to analyze what is about the accents which make them foreign. You may find it helpful to use the worksheet shown in box 4.2. Next stage is pooling and comparing. In small groups, listen to each recording and try to identify the errors and how and why you think this occurred. The last stage is drawing conclusion. Discuss your findings and draw conclusions. Questions that can usefully be investigated here are the following. This is the box for one, the worksheet recording of foreign pronunciation. So the speaker modern language, like for example, is Black American, Black English American, and the words column. You can, for example, like that. The mispronounced like T A. I'm sorry, D A T. And the mistakes is the left side is you should say that tadi menjadi T H A T. And you can find them more, and that's it. So unit 3 will be explained by Ahmad Agusman. So Ahmad Agusman, time is yours.
The objective. The aim of pronunciation improvement is not to achieve a perfect imitation of a native accent, but simply to get a learner to pronounce accurately enough to be easily and comfortably comprehensible to other speakers. Inquiry. Ask a group uh, of learners whether they want achieve a perfect native accent or not. If they say no, find out whether this is only because they think it is impossible or because they genuinely do not see it as a desirable objective. Why do learners make pronunciation error? Number one, a particular sound may not exist in the mother tongue. So that the learner is not used to forming it, and therefore tends to substitute the nearest equivalent. He or she knows the substitutions of the or the for the English C or the, as in that is a typical example. Number two, a sound does exist in the mother tongue, but not as a separate phoneme. That is to say, the learner does not perceive makes a difference to meaning. In Hebrew, for example, both the I and E, I'm sorry, both the E and E, like sheep and sheep, sounds occur, but which is used depends only on where the sounds comes in the word or phrase, not what the word means. And if one is substituted for the other, no difference in meaning result. These are called allophonic variations of a phoneme or allophones. So, uh, question number one. Consider some foreign language learners with whom you are familiar, preferably your own students whose mother tongue you also know. Can you identify instances or mistakes in sound formation and why they make them? For example, the sounds doesn't exist in their own language or exist only as an allophone. Question number two. Uh, Listen to some not very advanced learners speaking the foreign language, or if you did the previous unit, listen again to a recording. Can you identify three or four instances of inappropriate stress or intonation? Getting learners to proceed. The first thing that needs to be done is to check the learner can hear and identify the sounds you want to teach. The same goes for intonation, rhythm, and stress. Can the learner hear the difference between how a competent or native speaker of language says a word, phrase, or sentences, and how a foreign learner says it? This can be done by requesting imitation or seeing if learners can distinguish between minimal pairs such as sheep or sheep, man, tick and tick, and so on. Question number three. Choose an error that seems to you particularly widespread and persistent. How might you test learners to find out if they really perceive the difference between their version and the correct one? Telling learners what to do. The next stage for some learners may be some kind of explicit exhortation. This is what it ought to be. This is what you are doing wrong. For some information, it may have actually to use a sketch of the mouth and to describe the pronunciation of a sound in terms of lips, tongue, teeth, and so on. See the box 4.3. There is a sketch of parts of the mouth. Next, question number 4. Again, just a typical learner's error you're familiar with. How would you explain to the learner what he or she is doing wrong and how to put it right? And next, see the box 4.4 ideas for improving learners' pronunciation. The first, imitation of teacher or recorded models of sounds, words, and sentences. Recording of learner speech contrasted with native model. Systematic explanation and instruction. Imitation drills, repetition of sounds, words, and sentences, and so on. Next, to Unit 4, further topics for discussion. Uh, these units look at some controversial issue connected with the teaching of pronunciation and invites you in the task to examine and state your own position on them. Group discussions. Look at the questions suggested in box 45 and discuss them with colleges. There should be arrive at general agreement on acceptable answer. So, this may not always be possible. In any case, it is important to clearly exactly what the issues are. If there is a disagreement, to understand the argument of all sides. And see the book 4.0 questions for discussion on the teaching of pronunciation. The first, does pronunciation needs to be deliberately tough? Won't it just be picked up? If it does need to be deliberately tough, then should this be in the shape of specific pronunciation exercises or casually in the course of other oral activities? Number two, what accent of the target language should serve as a model? For example, for English, for example, should you use British, American, other local accent? Uh, it is permissible to present mixed accent. For example, a teacher who has a mid-Atlantic, uh, such as a mixed British and American accent. Number three, can or should the non-native teacher serve as a model for target language pronunciation? Number four, what differences or what difference does the learner's age make in learning pronunciation? Number five, how important is it to teach in intonation, rhythm, and stress? To Unit 5, pronunciation and spelling. There are of course language where there are many exceptions to such rules. Many words whose pronunciation could not be logically predicted from their spelling and vice versa. Next, the alphabet. The basic sound symbol correspondence is learned at a stage of learning the alphabet. If the alphabet is a totally new one, then there is a lot to learn, but it is clear that every new symbol needs to be tough with its pronunciation. And the question number one, you can pick one or choose one uh, according the situation. The uh, uh, Question number one, you can choose one according to the situation. Either if your target language uses the same alphabet as a mother tongue, of your students, which are the letter which will be pronounced very differently from their native version, which will be pronounced only slightly differently, or their any which are exactly the same. Or you can just, if your target language uses a different alphabet, can you divide it into letters whose sounds have close parallel symbols in the learner's mother tongue? For example, Greek Delta and English D, and those which do not. The rules of pronunciation, spelling, correspondence. Once learners have mastered the basic sound symbol correspondence, they may, in some languages, be immediately able to decode and pronounce correctly and written text, or conversely, write down a spoken one. And question number two, can you suggest four or five rules about letter combinations and their pronunciation in the language you teach that you think it would be important for learners to master in the early stages of learning to speak and read? Pronunciation in spelling activities. A number of ideas are listed in book 4.6. Uh, Planning and using activities. Choose three activities for teaching. Raising awareness of practicing pronunciation, spelling, correspondence in the target language. This can be from uh, box 4.6 or from other sources. If feasible, try using them with a learner in a 1-to-1 lesson. See box 4.6. Maybe that's all from me. Back to moderator.
Okay, thank you, Ahmad, for the explanation. And so the next topic will be explained by Putri Setia. So Putri, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, moderator. So the next material is about teaching vocabulary in module 5. So the first is unit 1. In unit 1 is what is vocabulary and what needs to be taught. So the first is we have to know what is vocabulary. So vocabulary can be defined roughly as the words we teach in the foreign language. However, a new items of vocabulary may be more than a single word. For example, post office and so on, which are made up 2 or 3 words but express a single idea. So the question 1 is, can you think of 5 or 6 examples of vocabulary items in any language you know that consist of more than one words? So the next is about what need to be taught. So there are 6. The first is form of pronunciation and spelling. The learners has to know what a word sounds like its pronunciation and what it looks like its spellings. The second is grammar. The grammar of new item will need to be taught if this is not officially covered by general grammatical rules. The third is collocation. The collocation typical of particular items are another factor that make a particular combination sounds right or wrong in a given context. The fourth is aspect of meaning. There are denotation, connotation, and appropriateness. In the denotation, for example, is dog, denotes as a kind of animal, more specifically, a common domestic carnivora mammalia. And for connotation, for example, the word dogs in British have positive connotation as a friendship or loyalty. Meanwhile, in Arabic, the dog is understood by most people as a negative connotation, dirt and inferiority. The next is aspect of meaning too. Meaning relationship. There are synonyms, antonyms, hyponyms, cohyponyms, superidionates, and translation. And then the last is words formation. So the question, pertanyaan yang bisa digunakan itu adalah seperti, can you think of 5 or 6 examples of items in the language you teach whose grammatical characteristics are not obviously conferred by a regular grammatical rule and which you will therefore need to teach when you teach the item. And then the next is, think of 3 or 4 typical collocation in the language you teach and try translating them into another language. Do the collocation translate exactly? If not, what kinds of learning or teaching problems might this lead to and what might you do about it? The next is, how would you present the meanings of the word swim, femme, childish, political, impertinence, kid, guy, and bastard? For which would you mention their connotation and their appropriate context? The next is, in any language you know, find at least one more example for each of the following main categories of meaning relationship. The next is, what prefix and suffix in the language you teach would you consider it useful for learners to know? How does language you know combine more words to make longer vocabulary items? Can you give example? So the next is unit 2, presenting new vocabulary. There are tasks exploring different ways of presenting new vocabulary. There are 4 stages. The first is stage 1, ideas for presenting specific items. You can use box 5.1. As you can see on the screen, box 5.1, the ways of presenting the meaning of new items. The next stage is studying further techniques. Put your practical suggestion aside for the moment. Study a list of different techniques of presenting the meaning of new vocabulary. The list may be compiled by a brainstorm among participants or derived from box 5.1 or combination of the two. The stage 3 is application and comparison. Identify which one or more of the techniques were used in your own ideas for presentation. The next stage is discussion. On the basis of the information gathered in stage 3 or your own reflection, discuss orally or in writing generalization that can be made about the usefulness of the different techniques. A specific questionnaire to consider appear in box 5.2. As you can see on the screen, there are 5 form that yang bisa kita gunakan. The next is unit 3, remembering vocabulary. The task is group experiment about memorizing word. Bentuk kegiatannya adalah take 3 minutes to memorize list A and see how many you remember afterwards. Then do the same with B, where the differences can you account for them. So we use box 5.3, as you can see on the screen, word learning experiment. There are A and B. So the question is, were there any particular word that most people seem to remember better? Can you account for this? And then the second question is, what strategies did people use or invent to help themselves remember? And then the third question is, was there any significance in the placing of an item in a list where words from the beginning or end more easily remember? The next is unit 4, about ideas for vocabulary work in the classroom. So the task is group like sharing ideas. There are 3 stages. The first is preparation. Each participant prepares a vocabulary activity which they think is effective. And then the second is presentation. The activities are presented to the group. This is best done by actually performing them. The presenter role playing the teacher and the others the student. In this way, you get the feel of the procedure and remember it well. The stage 3 is discussion. A discussion should follow each presentation on questions such as what was the main objective of the activity, what particular aspect of vocabulary did the activity focus on, how effective was it and why, how interesting or enjoyable was it, for what sort of class or situation is it appropriate, and so on. So this is the example of ideas for vocabulary activities. The first is brainstorming, and then identify what we know. For example, as you can see on the screen, ada kata tree atau pohon, dan kita bisa mengambil vocab lain dari kata pohon tersebut seperti green, bird, forest, leaf, family, and so on. The next unit is Unit 5, Testing Vocabulary. So the task is looking at vocabulary testing techniques. As you can see on the box 5.5, vocabulary testing techniques. Jadi di dalam box tersebut adalah beberapa suggestion atau saran tentang bentuk-bentuk dari vocabulary testing techniques. The first, the example 1 and 2 is multiple choice. Multiple choice questions are tricky and time-consuming to compose, but if the answers are clear, very quick, and easy to mark. And then example 3 is matching. As in the previous example, only meaning is tested and is knowledge of an opposite a proof that the test know the meaning of the original word. Matching items are quicker and easier to compose than multiple choice, but not that the last option, if the learner has all the order right, becomes obvious. Example 4 is also matching. Example 5, odd one out. Only meaning is being tested and you have no way of being sure that all the items are known. Example 6 is writing sentence. Spelling and pronunciation of the item are not tested, but most other aspects are. This is a bit boring to do and difficult to mark objectively. Example 7 is dictation. Dictation tests oral recognition and spelling only. Example 8, dictation translation. This check if students know meaning and spelling only. Example 9, gap filling. This test meaning, spelling, to some extent grammar and collocation. Example 10, gap filling with a pool of answer. Meaning is tested here, also to some extent grammar and collocation. And then example 11 is translation. Translation can test all aspects of an item. And then the last example, example 12, sentence completion. This test denotative meaning only, but is personalized and interesting to do and read. Okay, that's all from me. Back to the moderator.
Okay, thank you, Putri, for the explanation. So there are our material for today. And if you have any suggestion or comment, you can just write down below on the comment section. So that's all from ours, from group 9. Thank you and have a good day, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.